Uneducated Economist here. Get the dice for you. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the causes of inflation, and of course, I will be reading from Cantillon's essay on economic theory. This will be chapter 7 of part 2, chapter 7 of the essay, titled "More on the Increase and Decrease in the Quantity of Money in a State." And now this is a really good chapter because a lot of times when we think about inflation, we think about prices moving up, we automatically move to the money printer. We think, okay, money printer go burr, prices go up. What else is there to need to know, right? Like that's the reason. And then we can just wipe our hands clean of truly understanding what's causing the inflation. But really, we have to think about what is inflation. Inflation is the increase of money and credit. Prices are the results of inflation. Now, just because there was an increase of money or even credit, right, the availability of credit, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to cause inflation, right? People actually have to go out there and start spending that money. That spending of the money starts increasing consumption, and that's where the inflation is found, when the supply-demand imbalances begin to take place. Now, I'm going to read from this chapter. It's very short, so I'm probably going to read the whole chapter, and then we're going to have a little discussion on it. We do have to understand that this is written hundreds of years ago, and the way that Cantillon is describing this particular situation is with a silver mine and the new money coming into the system and what happens when that takes place. Now, the abstract of this chapter, it goes like this. When there is an increase in the quantity of money, prices will increase depending on how the new money holders decide to spend their money. The price changes will also be affected by such things as regulations on trade and the perishability of the products that are traded. In other words, the simple quantity theory of money is naive in proposing that a doubling of quantity of money will double all prices equally. Changes in the quantity of money will change relative prices and have real effects on the economy, a phenomenon known as the Cantillon effect. Now, we're going to go in and we're going to talk about, or I'm going to read through this chapter and then we're going to talk about it. But again, we have to take into consideration how old this thing is, and that the economic forces that were taking place back in the day, we have to look and kind of compare them to what it is taking place today, because we have cell phones and airplanes and way of doing transactions that were far different from 100 years ago, or even, what was this written, 200 years ago or more. But it goes like this. Where gold, silver, and copper are extracted from mines, they have an intrinsic value proportional to the land and labor that enter into their production. States that have no mines have the added cost of importing the metal. The quantity of money, like that of all other commodities, determines its value against all other goods in the bargaining process of the marketplace. So depending on how much money is actually in the area will determine what the things are going to be priced at, right? There's only so much money, and there's, going to be so much value that those things can actually require or ask for as far as the price of each individual goods and the limitation of money in that area. All right, goes on. If England begins for the first time to make use of gold, silver, and copper in exchange, money will be valued according to the quantity in circulation, proportionally to its power of exchange against all other merchandise and products. The bargaining process of the market will determine these estimations of value. On the basis of this estimation, the property owners and entrepreneurs will set the wages of their domestic servants and workmen at so much a day or a year, so that they and their families may be able to live on the wages they receive. Okay? Now, again, like this is the living wage that he is talking about, and what it is that those people who are entrepreneurs and businessmen, like the property owners, how much they would have to pay in order for people to make a living for an entire year. Right? Let us now assume that because of the ambassadors and foreign travelers residing in England, as much money has been introduced into circulation as there was before, thereby doubling the quantity of money. This money will pass first into the hands of various artisans, servants, entrepreneurs, and others who have had a share in providing transportation, amusement, etc., for these foreigners. So you see what he's talking about? A bunch of foreigners show up and start buying goods and services and enjoying that money, that new money that's coming in, right? And he's talking about the way that that travels through. This new money will first pass through the various artisans, servants, and entrepreneurs who have had their share in providing transportation, amusement, and etc. for these foreigners. You see how this new money is coming in, right? Manufacturers, farmers, and entrepreneurs will feel the effect of the increase in money. So the people who have enjoyed this new money are the people who are getting first access to it, are the people who they're spending the money on their enjoyment, right? The things that they want, they need. The people who have the money are then dictating where that money is going to, right? It's going to their desires. All right. Manufacturers, farmers, and entrepreneurs will feel the effect of the increased money, which will increase the expenditures of a great number of people and will in turn increase market prices. So you think about that as that new money is coming in from these foreigners, right? Bringing in this new money, the people who have first access to it, all these servants and entrepreneurs and artisans, they start increasing their expenditures as well, right? Because now they got new money coming in. And that's exactly what he says. Manufacturers, farmers, and entrepreneurs will feel the effect of increased money, which will increase the expenditures of a great number of people, and this will in turn increase the market prices. This is the added consumption that starts to take place from the new money coming in. Even the children of these entrepreneurs and artisans will enter into new expenditures. With the abundance of money, their fathers will give them little money for their petty pleasures and will buy cakes and meat pies and etc. So you think about the affluent kids running around spending all this money, right? That's what he's kind of describing. This is something that took place way back in the day too. Right? This new money, or the new quantity of money, will be distributed so that many who lived without using money before will now have some. You think about it, there was barter and exchange and trading and all kinds of stuff, but now there's money flowing through the system and people have access to it who never had access to it before. Pretty interesting to think about, right? Okay, so it goes on. This new quantity of money will be distributed so that many who lived without using money before will now have some. Many exchanges, which used to be made on credit by valuation, will now be made with cash, and that will increase the pace of circulation of money in England compared to before. I conclude from all this that by doubling the quantity of money in a state, the prices of products and merchandise are not always doubled. The river which runs and winds about its beds will not flow with double the speed when the amount of water is doubled. The change in relative prices introduced by the increase of quantity of money in the state will depend on how this new money is directed at consumption and circulation. See the new money coming in and the direction in which that it begins to flow. That's where the money starts flowing. That's where the price increases start to be found, right? No matter who obtains the new money, it will naturally increase consumption, no matter who gets it. See, this is one of the things, like I've talked about how many times, right? The added consumption that takes place from it. However, this consumption will be greater or less according to circumstances. It will more or less be directed to certain kinds of commodities or merchandise, according to the judgment of those who acquire the money. Market prices will increase more for certain goods than others. However abundant the money may be. In England, the price of meat might triple, but the price of wheat might increase less than 1/4. You see, because the added consumption starts driving up more consumption of meat, there's less meat available out there, and the prices move up, but wheat, totally available, doesn't increase in the price. In England, it is still permitted to import wheat from foreign countries, but not cattle. For this reason, however, great the increase of money may be in England, the price of wheat can only be raised above the price in other countries where the money is scarce by the cost or risk of importing wheat from these foreign communities or countries. So you think about it, like the price of wheat, the added consumption starts increasing the price of wheat because everybody's consuming more, but now the foreign production starts competing with the domestic manufacturing. And now all it has to take is the transportation cost and the lower price of the wheat of a foreign place to then compete with the domestic manufacturers, and now the price of wheat can only go so high. And that's it, no matter how much money comes in, because the foreign production now keeps that limitation from going any further. If you can't bring the meat in, it's only limited to the amount of meat that is produced within that nation. And the price starts to move up when the added consumption begins to take place. You see how this works? This is really the way to understand inflation, because money printer go burr doesn't cause inflation, right? As much as, people like roll their eyes when I say that, it's the fact. Quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4 failed to produce the inflationary scenario the Fed was looking for. If you don't understand why, we have to figure that out. And we have to explain why it is that it was taking place and why we had so much inflation during the quantitative easing that took place during the pandemic, and understanding that it was more about the added consumption that took place along with the severing of the supply chain that created the demand imbalances, supply-demand imbalances that really caused the inflation that we had experienced. See, it's important to understand this stuff, because if you can understand it from the economic forces that took place 200 years ago, then it makes a lot more sense on what is happening today. Okay? We move on. It is not the same with the price of cattle, which will necessarily be proportioned to the quantity of money offered for meat in relation to the quantity of meat and the number of cattle raised there. See, exactly what I was saying. An ox weighing 800 pounds sells in Poland and Hungary for 2 or 3 ounces of silver, but commonly sells in London market for more than 40. Yet, a bushel of flour does not sell in London for even double the price of in Poland or Hungary. You see that? Because the amount of produced can only bring it up to a certain level if you have foreign competition coming in. But if you don't have foreign competition for your meat, there's only what is available that can be produced within the nation itself, and then limited to that number, then starts increasing the price that people would pay for it, right? An increase of money only increases the price of commodities and merchandise by the difference of the cost of transport. When the transport is allowed, right? Talking like meat, the cattle and the wheat, the grain, right? Like those two differences. But in many cases, transportation would cost more than the goods are worth. Therefore, example, timber is useless in many places. The cost of transportation is also the reason why milk, fresh butter, lettuce, and game, etc., are almost given away in the provinces of distance from the capital, right? So you get away from the capital where there's not a lot of demand for it, and it's almost worthless. Like, this butter, this lettuce, all this other stuff, it has a shelf life. It can only last so long, and if you don't have an immediate buyer for it like you would find in the capital, then it doesn't have a whole lot of value to it. Right? So you see, the farther away from they get from the capital, the less value it has, right? You got to go to a place where there's demand for it. I conclude that an increase of actual money in the state always causes an increase of consumption and a routine of greater expenditures. But the higher prices caused by the money does not affect all commodities and merchandise equally. Right? People wonder why it is that lumber is back down under 500 per thousand while the inflationary scenario runs rampant through the economy, and people are all tripping out trying to figure out what it is that the Fed is going to do to bring inflation down, but yet lumber has no inflation to it at all. Why? It's because it doesn't affect all commodities equally, right? Just because the money printer went off doesn't mean that all prices are going to go up. Prices do not rise proportionally to the quantity of money, unless what has been added continues in the same circulation channels as before. Very important to understand that new money has to continue to flow into the economy through all the channels at the same pace, same speed, through all aspects of it, right? It doesn't work like that. How much increase in toilet paper are you going to buy because you got an extra $100 this month? Probably none, right? And that would be the same for most people out there. But you're going to buy a lot of toilet paper if you don't feel that there is going to be toilet paper available. You will increase your purchasing of it. However, just because you had a bunch of money printed up doesn't mean you're going to increase your consumption of toilet paper if you don't believe that there is going to be a shortage of it, right? But you might increase your consumption of meat and go out there and get an extra ribeye, right? So you won't increase your toilet paper purchase, but you might increase your meat purchase. Right? See how this is the way that the money starts flowing in through these different channels? It's not going to flow into toilet paper, but it will flow into ribeyes. Makes a huge difference. In other words, those who offered 1 ounce of silver in the market would be the same and only ones to offer 2 ounces when the amount of money in circulation is doubled. Exactly what I was saying, right? Buying toilet paper or buying meat. You would be offering more for the meat than you would be offering for the toilet paper, and that is hardly ever the case. I recognize that when a large surplus of money is introduced in a state, the new money gives a new direction to consumption and even a new speed to circulation. However, it is not possible to say exactly to what extent. So this is the reason why you find some things just moving up like crazy, and you're thinking, man, how come it is that we have such a high increase in the price of these particular products out there, but yet it doesn't seem to be affecting other things that are out there? It's because of the direction and the consumption that has taken place. Just because the money has been increased doesn't mean everybody has access to that money, which means that the added consumption is not going to be equal through the entire economy. And that's very important to understand. You can't just fix the inflationary scenario when the inflationary scenario is so obscured through so much parts of the economy. Really, what the Federal Reserve is looking for is help from the supply side of things. They want supply to be plentiful out there, and if supply is plentiful, then the demand will find its equilibrium to it, and this is really where the price stability is found, right? Anyhow, okay, moving on. Let's go read through some of these comments. We got 16, almost 17 minutes into it. We got 252 people watching right now with 46 thumbs up. Thank you so much for hitting that thumbs up button. We got $1.49 and super chats. Let's go check that thing out. Oh, it was a super sticker from Jose. Thank you so much, Jose, for the $1.49. All right, let's read some of these comments through here. All right, interest payments weren't higher than our GDP then, though. Hey Simon, hello everyone. Debt levels are so massive that interest rates are not going to matter going forward. Wayne says, good afternoon, Crypto Beauty. Didn't matter in the Roman Empire either. Oh, wait. Silver is up today. Bought 10-ounce bars at 300 last week. Today they want 320. Americans are screwed. They are having to borrow money in order to pay the service on the national debt, going in debt to make the minimum payment on existing debts. Told my dealer we would hit $30 this week at spot, sitting at $29.5 right now. All right, thanks Wayne, thanks Jose, thank you all-nighter. All right, caught you live 2 days in a row. Right on, Steve. It's great to see you here, man. We just lie now, totally sound. Dub Big Cat says, and yet America doing better than the rest of the world. If you want to see poverty, go do some research. Yeah. The homeless will be the teachers. They have nothing to lose. Good call, Caveman, calling 11 on the dice. All right, get a passport and get out while you can. Wayne says, all-nighter hider, no problem. I like to see the wrench. All right. FR33, 99% employment rate, yet we pay 13% annual budget to unemployment. Make it make sense. All right. Dub Big Cat says, like 1/3 of the population of Russia don't even have plumbing. All-nighter says, I'm at a loud real estate event. I'll have to listen again later. Right on, brother. All right, angry capitalist. Inflationary prices don't rise evenly. They sloth around, rising different prices at different rates. And sometimes they don't raise them at all. Like, think about this. Lumber was the #1 focused in commodity when it came to the inflationary scenario of money printer prices go up. I mean, think about it. How many people out there were putting out lumber narrative stories and YouTube videos and talking about how all the inflation can be found in lumber? And I was one of the lone voices out there going, what are y'all going to say When lumber comes back down to a normal price and the inflationary scenario is still running rampant out there, right? When that, like, it was so it was so frustrating for me to have put out literally hundreds of videos talking about the supply chain inventory breakdown of lumber all throughout 2019, and then go into 2020 and have people tell me that I have no clue about the Federal Reserve, inflation, money printing, or the commodity markets out there, when lumber was at 1,700 per thousand, and I'm saying that it's going to go back down to a normal price. I understood that market very clearly. Like, I don't even know how it is that I was able to find it so clear, like the view of it so clear as I did, right? But it was obvious. I mean, it was so obvious to me that it had more to do with the inventory levels, with the mill shutdowns, with the curtailments that were taking place, with the issues that were happening in British Columbia, with, like, I don't know, like, I saw all the parts and pieces and I put them together and I was just like, man, this is so different than what everybody believes, right? And then having my understanding of macroeconomics, it just made it so clear. It was just easy enough for me to call it out. And that's why I was saying, it was just like, man, this isn't making sense. Like, none of this stuff is making sense out there, especially when it came to the Federal Reserve, when they said, yeah, we are hoping to get help from the supply side of things. I knew right then, I was like, okay, that's it. That's the credible threat right there, right? The Federal Reserve is not looking for an inflationary scenario to go back down. They want the inflation expectation to remain elevated, and they got it. They got it going on right now. Yeah. All right, we got dishes up in the house. All right, I didn't even see her. Where's she at? I don't see dishes comment. All right. Let's see here. There is no one alive today that has ever experienced a time when the US dollar wasn't sought after by the rest of the world. That's not true. No, that's not true. During the Carter administration, there was a time in which that the dollar was really losing value. It was in the late 70s. And it was a really bad situation. In fact, a lot of people didn't know if the dollar was even going to make it at that point. Like, they thought for sure it was on its way out. So many people were taking out Swiss bank accounts that it was actually the first time, at least that I, in my study of history of economics and stuff, that a banking institution set a negative interest rate upon the depositors of their accounts. And it was due to the amount of foreign deposits that were coming into the Swiss banks, that it was driving the value of the Swiss franc up so much that it was screwing their exports up big time. And so they started trying to create regulations that would deter people from depositing money into those accounts. Like, literally, this is the Swiss bank saying, stop giving us money. Like, isn't that crazy to think about? Like, they were like, stop depositing money in our banks. You're causing the Swiss franc to grow too strong and it's screwing up our exports. We don't want this, right? And so they actually put a negative interest rate on the depositors of foreign bank accounts for a short time there. And like I said, I think that was the first time there was actually a negative interest rate attached to a bank account. I could be wrong, but at least that's the only time that I could think of prior to, recent history. But the Carter administration had a hell of a time selling bonds at a decent interest rate, right? So, like, nobody wanted to trust the United States. They're like, hey, you severed yourself from the gold standard. You're done. You're out. You're out of the game, right? And we don't trust you that much. And so the Carter administration needed to figure out a way to sell these bonds, but nobody really wanted to buy them, right? So they ended up promising to pay them back. Like, literally, the United States was selling bonds that were due back in francs and German marks, Swiss francs and German marks. Just like a foreign entity out there selling their bonds in US dollars, like they're due back in US dollars, the United States was selling bonds in a foreign currency. They were selling them in promising to pay back in francs and German marks so that they could actually get a decent rate for them. They were called Carter bonds. Go look them up, right? So there was a time in which that the demand for dollars, or at least the trust for the dollar, was far less than what it is today. But I would have to agree there was never a time in which that there was never a demand for it. There's always been a demand. But yeah, during the Carter administration, they had a hell of a time right there. Got here late, but I'm ready to rock with some Cantillon. Right on. Let's cruise down here and get to some current comments. All right, M Rider 77. What would happen if all the nations agree not to pay the United States the debt in dollars and they all agree to work with each other against us? They would fail immediately. They wouldn't work. It wouldn't work, right? You can't do it like that because there would be nothing there, right? It's just like it's a great imagination and would work in like to verbally say it. Like, you know, it's like saying, why don't we all just use silver, right? Why don't we all just use silver for our purchases, and then we wouldn't have to worry about all this inflationary scenario that comes up. Why don't we just use silver? Well, if you understand Gresham's law, then you would know that silver would pretty much be non-existent within the economy if you had paper currency competing against it, because bad money chases out good, right? But then on a foreign concept of that, if we were to go to like a metal standard, we would export all our money immediately because we don't produce enough within our own nation to sustain our standard of living. So we would export all our money and we would be broken in misery if we were to follow that situation. So no nation is going to be able to set themselves up on a metal standard. Like, it's not going to work like that, right? The most industrious nation will hoard all the money for themselves and everybody will suffer in poverty and misery. Not to mention, it will drastically limit the amount of transactions that would be available for people to do out there. So now when it comes to the dollar, right, and other nations saying, hey, we don't want to use the dollar anymore, right? Get out of here. We're going to dump we're not going to pay back our dollar denominated debt. Right? Well, who did you sell that debt to? Right? It may not be to the United States. It might have been you sold that, Brazil might have sold debt to somebody in India, but it's due in dollars. Now that dude over there is going, oh, hell no, I want my dollars, yo. Like, I mean, you might want to piss the America off, but you're pissing me off because that thing is due to me, not them. Right? You see what's going on here? It's just like there is talk, like even the United States has the ability to default on their bonds, which would be devastating to the United States. But they could pick and choose, like say, hey, we're going to default on the ones that China owns, right? And China can have defaulted bonds. If they were to allow that to happen, the bond market, the U.S. Treasury market would become almost instantly illiquid, as people would be like, oh shit, my bonds are the next ones to be defaulted on, right? And that's the worry of it. The trust for the U.S. Treasuries is far greater than anything anybody else could ever possibly provide as far as a sovereign nation goes. Like, nobody trusts the debt of any other nation to the level that they trust the United States. And not only do they trust it, it's also there to purchase because the United States is willing to go into deep debt as they are, in order to provide the world with that safe and liquid asset of the U.S. Treasuries. See, this is one of the reasons why people are so concerned about some of the things that are happening out there, is because the sheer amount of debt that the United States has taken out, not realizing that the world is demanding that debt, that treasury, those assets, those safe and liquid assets. And the reason why they're demanding it from the United States is because nobody else can provide it like the United States does. It's very important. It's, all this stuff is really important to wrap your head around, and you can't assume just because, like, oh, well, these nations are getting together and they're going to say piss on the dollar, that it's going to damage the United States. Do you realize, like, China, for most of the Belt and Road Initiative that they have done out there, they have lent money to these foreign nations in U.S. dollars. They're due back in U.S. dollars. Here, you want to read something on it? Go and read right here, this one. Dollar funding stresses in China. This is written by the Federal Reserve, talking about that very topic. Right? Talking about how much demand, right, is needed for the dollar in China. Right? Dollar funding stresses in China. China cannot find the dollars they need. There's stresses taking place within China. And it's not just China. I mean, this is just one example. This is happening all over the world right now. King Dollar the Destroyer, right, is coming to destroy these other nations out there. That's a video I did 2 years ago when people were like, just like thought I was completely off my rocker. But now here it is, it's taking place. Because if you truly understand the macroeconomics of it and understand it from beyond the political aspect of things, which is very consequential, right, to the study, you'll see it too. All right. $5 from Bay Ocean Bear. Thank you so much for the $5. Hey Simon, could you touch on how the pillars of communism how affected the economy of America since the 1916? No, because that's a political aspect of things that is not, to me, is not nearly. I mean, it's an important aspect of things because it certainly changed the way that the government handles like the social safety nets and, you know, the too big to fails and stuff like that. Those things never would have occurred had we not had the shift into the communistic type of government features that we now have, right? So none of that stuff would have really taken place. But again, that to me is really more of the effect of the economy growing to the level that it has. See, if the industriousness of the people were not as prevalent as it was, then that situation never would have taken place. You see, so like, because the economy grew to the level that it was, it gave room for that communistic feature to then be put into place. Does that kind of make sense to it all? Again, like, it's more about like the manufacturing of that particular nation, how it is that the people then interact with that rise in manufacturing. Like, if the people themselves were to be very industrious, be producers and savers, kept their expenditures very low, kept their like standard of living low, kept their purchases into luxuries low, and did a lot of reinvestment back into manufacturing and in investment into savings and stuff like that, then you would have a nation that could continually be in a better state than the years before, right? You know, you're constantly growing. However, the problem with it is that the moment that people start to really enjoy the hard work and the savings and the production that they have done, that move into luxuries is really what starts creating the problem, because then that gives room for the domestic manufacturers to start bringing their products in. And it doesn't matter like what kind of political environment you have, this is the situation that takes place. You think about it, really, if you didn't want it to happen, right? If you didn't want the move into luxuries, which is the real problem for an economy that starts to expand, right? You know, you got the people who have now worked really hard and had all this money in savings. They start moving into luxuries. That's the problem. How do you prevent that from taking place? Like, you can have a political environment that puts down with an iron fist that says you cannot do this. See, if you have communism within it, then you might actually create a situation in which your people are prevented from moving into luxuries. Right? So really, you want to fix the problem? You want to fix the okay, there you go. You want to fix the problem? Don't move into luxuries. How do you do that? Vote communism. Right? You won't be moving into luxuries then. In fact, they'll take your luxuries away from you. Right? But hey, you get to save your economy, you know, because you're not going to have that foreign production moving in like before, and it's worked, right? I mean, I can't find an example of it, but people seem to think that you can fix it. Right? So again, like, this is like, to understand it, like, what is the real problem? The real problem is that you had figured out a way to earn a lot of money, producing and saving, and then moving into luxuries. Bang, that's the problem right there. As soon as you move into luxuries, the foreign production starts finding its way in, the domestic manufacturing finds its way out, and then eventually you will export all your money and you'll fall into poverty and misery if you cannot figure out a way to keep the new money rolling in. The United States does it through debt issuance. China right now is trying to figure out how to continue on bringing new money in through manufacturing, even though their manufacturing is now leaving, because this is part of the Cantillon effect. All right. What time is it? 12:11. All right, guys, I got a few more minutes and then I got to call it quits here. I think the algorithm really likes 30-minute videos. I think that's like, the best for it. All right. In a free market, the government is not supposed to interfere. BlackRock, government entity, has interfered in nearly every facet of the economy. See, this is the reason why I don't believe in capitalism. I mean, I believe in capitalism. I don't believe in capitalism existing, right? I don't believe capitalism exists, right? Because if capitalism existed, then there would be the rise and fall of people and corporations on their own merits. There wouldn't be private gains and public losses. See, when they come in and they say, oh, these entities are too big to fail, when Obama stepped up during the great financial crisis and said all these entities are too big to fail, that was pure socialistic, communistic transactions taking place, right? There was no capitalism. Capitalism was dead, right, at that point, because all these banks, all these corporations, and all these people should have failed. They should have gone bankrupt, right? However, if that was to take place within our system, in our financial system, the way it is constructed, right, since the creation of the Federal Reserve, would completely annihilate our entire way of life, our economy, and we'd be suffering in poverty and misery. They have to do it this way, or else the whole thing fails, right? And I know that at some point they're not going to be able to do it anymore, right? But I don't believe that time is now. I think that time is still down the road. And the only reason why I believe that is because there's nothing else out there that can replace the dollar. Like if there was another nation out there that people trusted enough to buy their debt on a level that they trust the United States and could go into deep enough debt like the United States and then import the production of all the world and export their dollars to the world like the United States can, then I would be like, okay, well, then there's a competition right there. There's your competitor. There's nobody out there, not even remotely close. They are not even close. So it's just like, people were like, man, it's going to happen. It would be like, it can't, okay, why, ow. Well, like it can't. It just simply can't happen, right? Not yet. And if it did, it would be so devastating, such a nightmare existence out there that I don't think people would be prepared to deal with it. Now, those who have mentally prepared for what it would be like to return to a gold standard or to have like a Bitcoin standard or to understand what would happen if fiat currencies were to begin to fail and know how those fiat currencies fail in relation to them not being a world reserve currency, right? Like people say, oh, Zimbabwe or Venezuela or, whatever. Those were not world reserve currencies. There wasn't nations and entities and people all over the world taking out Bolivar denominated debt, right? Only Venezuelans were. But everybody all over the world takes out dollar denominated debt, right? Huge story difference. All right, moving on. I was rent to pay someone else's mortgage. All right. People won't be able to pay rent on property, though. Would you invest in a house to rent, a vacation rental property, or farmland? Me personally would probably go towards farmland if I had the opportunity there. All right, what time is it? Okay, guys, I'm going to call it quits here. That is capitalism, unfettered capitalism to be more exact. I don't know where you're talking. The entire mess can be traced back to the removal of the gold as the backing of the dollar. Little James, I think you're misunderstanding what was taking place during that time, because if we didn't remove ourselves from the gold standard in the early 70s, what would have happened is that our way of life would be now in complete poverty and misery. All right. See, the problem that we were facing is that the United States was the producer of the world's greatest stuff. And this was like, although one of the greatest things that could have ever happened to us, it was also the reasons why it is such a problem that we are facing today. Is because when we were producing all the world's greatest stuff, we were sending that stuff out there to the world, and the world was sending us their gold, and we had accumulated all of it. Like, most of it, right? Between the war, between the production, between everything that we were doing, we had it. We had the gold. And then we really enjoyed having the gold. Our standard of living really increased. You think about it, one income could produce enough money, right, for an entire household. the house, the car, the kids, the college, the retirement, the vacations, all the stuff. One income could do this. Well, that was because we were the world's producers of the greatest stuff in the world, and the world was sending us their gold. We enjoyed the luxury, right? And this is the same thing that Cantillon describes, right? Same thing. Now, what ends up happening is that because we enjoyed that higher standard of living and all those luxuries, we had to start bringing in foreign production because it was far cheaper than our own domestic manufacturers were. And definitely people, when they have an increase of money, don't want to spend more money on their stuff. They want to spend the same amount of money on the stuff. They just want to get more stuff. And this is where the foreign production starts to come in. Now, as foreign production starts to come in, what are we doing? We're exporting money, our gold. And now by the 70s, we were really raising our standard of living. The domestic manufacturing was moving out of our nation. The domestic or the foreign production was coming in a drastic fashion. And if we continued on this path, we were going to fail. So we severed the gold standard and says, no more. We're not going to do it anymore. You're going to use fiat currency and just accept it for that. And by that time, everybody had done so much transactions in the dollar that they really didn't have anything else to use. So if you look back into Triffin's dilemma, all right, this is really where it comes down to, is that the United States was now sitting in a position in which that they had promised all these people who had dollars that they would exchange a certain amount of dollars for a fixed amount of gold, and everybody believed it. And because they believed it, they were willing to use the dollars for their transactions. And so the world started using dollars for their transactions, thinking that they were as good as gold. By the time they realized there was far more dollars out there than there was going to be gold to back it all, it was too late. Right? And now the demand to be able to do transactions was allowing the United States to then sever themselves from the gold standard and push that fiat currency out there because the world wanted to continue to do transactions and there was nothing available for them to do it with. If they were limited to the amount of gold that was available out there, the amount of transactions would plummet. And this is important to understand. This is one of the reasons why we cannot go back to a gold standard. If we were a manufacturing nation where we produced and sold more than we import, let's do it. Man, I'm game, right? But we don't do that. We import more than we export, and if we were to sever ourselves or remove the fiat currency and try to reestablish a gold standard, we would be broken in poverty and misery almost instantly. It's not a good idea, right? Now, personal opinion is you should have a lot of gold and silver in your physical possession, right? Physical gold and silver, right? Definitely an insurance policy that I think is the number one thing that anybody should have. If you have nothing, like you have no money, go out there, earn $35 and buy an ounce of silver, right? And that's really the way I feel about it because it's more of an insurance policy than it's going to be used as an investment or return to a gold standard or anything else like that. You know. All right, I got to go, guys. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed hanging out talking inflation from the Cantillon theories or the Cantillon essay. Very important stuff to understand. All right, they could just use seashells. They could. Right? You could use seashells, you could use cryptocurrencies, you can use all kinds of stuff. But then again, you're going to be limited to the amount of transactions you have by the amount of seashells you have available to do it with. Yeah. Be your own central banks. Sorry I'm late. It's all right, Gerald. I'm about ready to end. Capitalism has bust, but nowhere near as bad or as long as government bubbles. Alrighty, guys. This was a lot of fun. Woodrow made a big mistake. The world is more competitive now, and there is no way the U.S. can continue with 50% GDP with only 5% of the population. Yeah, I know. There was so many things that I have heard for so long that the United States will never be able to do. Since I was a little kid, they said, man, the debt was not sustainable, and it's, something's going to have to be done by the time, you're an adult. Well, here I am, I'm almost 50 years old, right? And they're still doing it. Right? So what is it they're going to do? I don't know. Is it bad? Yeah, it's real bad, right? Even the Fed is like, man, you're unsustainable. This is an unsustainable debt path. However, I don't think the Federal Reserve is necessarily concerned about whether or not the United States is going to be able to pay its bills. I'm sure they always be able to pay their bills. Whether or not what they're paying with is going to be valuable, that might be another story. I think the bigger concern for the Federal Reserve is what is it they are going to do to expand the money supply if they cannot buy the U.S. debt. That's where the foreign treasury or the foreign debt market, I think, is on their mind, right? Is on the Federal Reserve's radar. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know. Thank you very much for being here. We got 278 people watching with 131 likes and $6.49 in super chats because you guys are always so supportive of the channel. Thank you so much for being here. Uneducated Economist, you let me know.